Welcome to the Alain Guillot podcast, a podcast about life, leadership, and money matters. Our guest today is Professor Deborah Dash Moore. Professor Moore is a professor of history and a professor of Judaic studies at the University of Michigan and editor-in-chief of the Posn Library. She specializes in 20th century Jewish American history, and today we will speak about Jewish culture and about the Posn Library of Jewish Culture. Professor Moore, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's great to be here, and I'm excited about it.
So I went to your I do part of my research in Amazon bookstore, and I saw all the books that you have written about Jewish cultures in the United States, and I was so amazed that you have covered so many different subjects of the culture, from soldiers to well, it's just the list goes on and on. But I would like to ask you about you. First of all, yeah, you are the daughter of immigrants. Can
No,
you? No.
no, I'm not the daughter of immigrants. I am actually someone. My grandparents even weren't immigrants.
Hmm.
So it's my great grandparents who were immigrants to the United States. They came in the 19th century. And I am the daughter of two people whose parents were not immigrants either, Jewish parents, but they were New Yorkers.
I see.
And so my parents met in high school, actually, in Brooklyn, and subsequently raised me and my sister in New York City. And our grandparents were all native English speakers. So the whole immigrant experience was really pretty distant from my own experience. On the other hand, since I grew up in New York, the New York Jewish experience was very real. And present, yes.
Okay. So thank you for correcting me. Well, tell me about your background, and in particular, why is it that you felt tempted to study history?
I really fell in love with history in part because of my grandfather on my mother's side, who did not get to go to high school. He had to go to work after elementary school. And he loved history and gave me books. But I also think that I fell in love with history because of experiences in elementary school. And I'll just give you one example. When we were in third grade, we had to study New York City history. And one of our projects involved taking paper, tissue paper, to do rubbings with charcoal. And the school was located across the street from an old Dutch cemetery, right? This is New York. School was downtown, and the Dutch were the first ones there. This was a Dutch church. And I guess I thought, oh, well, we're going to go across the street and we're going to rub gravestones, right? But no, we didn't go across the street to do rubbings of gravestones. We instead walked on the streets at blocks around the school, and we did rubbings of manhole covers. And we learned from the rubbings of the manhole covers all the different things that existed under the city, right? Which in some ways made its history come alive, right? The first electric, the gas, the telephone, right? I mean, all these things that are there, public transit, and we did manhole rubbings. And I think that got me hooked on history as a way of uncovering what's right beneath your feet.
This is not the first time that I had a guest in the podcast who tells me that their life have been influenced in one way or another by a teacher. And I am afraid that possibility that you have that you had to have your life influenced by a teacher, we are losing a sense of that, because we are, number one, we are moving to teaching online. Number two, our classrooms are more and more crowded. So that individual attention one-on-one or small groups in which the teacher gets to share more of the ideas and maybe guide a student is becoming more rare.
I think that you're right, especially it's been exacerbated by the pandemic. There's no question. Learning online is not the same as individual interactions and the kinds of creative possibilities that teachers can take when they're with a smaller group of students, because we weren't that many kids. I don't know, maybe 20 max, you know.
Okay, so then you not only you are a teacher, but also you became interested in Jewish studies. Can you tell me how that happened?
So I think that growing up in New York City, which is where I grew up, an awareness of Jewish life and culture was around me, just in the very fabric of the city itself. Whether it was institutions beyond synagogues, you know, there was the 92nd Street Y, that was an important cultural institution. And there were these places that represented the interest of Jewish culture in a broad way. In fact, just yesterday, I did a talk for the synagogue where I grew up, the Society for the Advancement of Judaism, which is 100 years old, and what it was like back in those early years. It was a very creative place, a radical place in terms of its Jewish politics. And I think that going to its Hebrew school was really influential in getting me excited about it, in part because as a girl, they treated girls the same as boys. And they gave girls the same education as boys got, and girls got a bat mitzvah, just like boys got a bar mitzvah. And that equality was very important.
Okay, I in before COVID, I used to be a part-time photographer, and I did end up photographing a few bar mitzvahs. And the one thing that impressed me, I mean, I enjoyed the whole ritual and ceremony and celebration and this and that, but I also was struck by the fact that the girls were separated from the boys. And well, I was there to take photos, not to ask questions, but I take this opportunity with you. Why are the girls separated from the boys?
Well, so you photographed a traditional, more orthodox observances that practice the separation of sexes, mostly in the synagogue, right? Women are seated separately from men, but some of these groups, especially more pious groups like Hasidim or what the Israelis call Haredi Orthodox, fervent Orthodox, maintain that separation even in celebrations like the party that might happen afterwards. And so the dancing is separate, right? And yeah, okay. But that was not my experience at all, right? I went up and read from the Torah scroll, just like any boy could read from the Torah scroll. And it was all integrated. And at the time, I thought that this was, because I was a girl, I wasn't that old. I thought that all Jews did this, and only later did I come to realize how special that was. And it meant also that Jewish intellectual interests were part of my upbringing, and I felt that as a girl growing up, I could participate and contribute.
Okay, so at a given moment in your career, you developed this taste for writing. Can you tell me about the moment that you decided that you were going to write your first book? What is it that gave you that courage? In my opinion, it requires courage. Some people tell me that they could not do it, so it's the thing that they had to do. Which one were you? And yeah.
So I think that I was involved in politics in the 1960s. And among the politics of the 1960s was the beginnings of not just movements for rights, equal rights for women and equal rights for African Americans in the States, but also there was a movement that eventually grew into what they came to call identity politics. And that meant that, you know, as someone who was a woman, you could write things that would help to change, one hopes, the world. And I got into a sort of form of identity politics by deciding to write about New York Jews. At the time, there was really very little that had been written about New York Jews that did not deal with them as immigrants. As you assumed, right? I was the daughter of immigrants. But I was aware, because of my background, that there were all these Jews who weren't immigrants, right? They were second, third generation, you know, removed from the immigrant experience. And I wanted to reclaim that experience and to make it available to others. And that became the basis of my first book, called At Home in America, on second generation New York Jews.
That's why I assumed that you were. Okay, perfect. So now you are the editor-in-chief of the Posn Library. How did that came into play? Where was that idea born? And I see that it's for free online. So also, how is that happening that people can go to this free library and read and learn about Jewish culture?
So the posnlibrary.com, P-O-S-E-N, library, one word, does have over 3,000 anthologized excerpts. And it came into being in part because Felix Posn, and that's where the name comes from, was fascinated by the diversity of Jewish culture and recognized that he himself, and he was someone with his family who escaped from Nazi Germany in the 30s, had not learned about it. He had, in fact, a traditional Jewish upbringing and education, which was focused on sacred text. And only much later in his life did he recognize that there was more. And it started because he was trying to figure out and understand the anti-Semitism that forced him to leave, and his family to leave, Germany. And he brought together Israeli scholars, Jewish scholars from the States, and a few from Europe, to talk about how can one have an impact on Jewish culture and Jewish education today, to broaden it, because it exists out there, but many Jews don't know about it. And the scholars who came together said that what's needed is a translation project. And the Posn Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization is a mammoth translation project. It translates materials from, I like to say, from Amharic to Yiddish. We have all these different languages that are now available in English, and makes available to anyone who reads English the richness of Jewish culture and civilization. So that's where the idea came from. The volumes, there are 10 volumes in the library. Half of them have been published to date. And the material in these 10 volumes, which are published by Yale University Press, is also available online. And that's what's available for free. You just have to go and register, and then you can explore all kinds of wonderful excerpts of fiction, of poetry, of political writing, and art as well. I see you have art in your room also.
Okay, so there are 10 volumes. How are these volumes separated? Is it by time period? Is it by geographical area?
The volumes are separated by time period. So you have the biblical volume, which has been completed, that covers the ancient world of the Israelites, with really interesting material that goes up to really before the Common Era. And then the other volumes that follow, that's volume 1. Volume 2 covers what we think of as the rabbinic period. Volume 3 is an early medieval period when Jews were mostly living under Islamic lands, with some obviously under Christian rule. And then volume 4 and volume 5, which is going to be the next one coming out, is the early modern period. And what's been published has been essentially of the modern era, starting from 1750 up to 2005, there's a gap between 1880 and 1918, which is.
Okay, I have
You asked about geography also. Let me add about geography. Within each of these time periods, the volumes cover the whole geographic spread of where Jews lived. That's why you translate from so many different languages, because although Jews wrote in Jewish languages like Yiddish or Ladino, they also wrote in the language of the lands where they lived. Whether it's French and Spanish and Russian and Polish, or Arabic or other Persian languages where they were living.
Well, it is my understanding that most of the Jewish population nowadays live, according to some of the readings I did, about 40% in the US and 40% in Israel, and then 20% all over the world. And what is more or less the Jewish population worldwide?
Now, you mean the numbers?
Yes.
Oh, they're around 13 million Jews. It's very small population.
Wow, that's exactly when that seems incredible, because everyone knows about the Jews, either because they live in their lands or because they have been persecuted. I guess we know about the Jews from World War II and Germany and the Nazi and the extermination. But when I read that it's only between 30 and 40 million Jews around the world, I was a little bit surprised.
Right. Well, I think it begins with the Bible, right? I mean, this is a very influential, in some ways, you can think of it as an anthology, right? Of a collection of incredibly important writings that become sacred, not just for Jews, but also for Christians and for Muslims. So those are much larger populations, but that is a formative contribution that Jews make to both of those religious cultures. But then, Jews continue to create and to write. And in the modern world, at least, through the 20th century, let's say, you have Jews writing throughout Europe, throughout North Africa, the Middle East, later smaller numbers of Jews, who live in South Africa or Australia, South America. It's really pretty incredible. The diversity.
Well, I'm going to ask you something that may seem very dumb, but it's because I still don't understand it. Okay, I wonder if you could explain to me antisemitism. Why? I mean, if I look at you, you don't look any different than millions of other people. When you speak to me, you don't sound any different. I have been victim of racial discrimination because I'm Hispanic. As soon as I open my mouth, people can see this huge Spanish accent, and I've been, declined jobs opportunities. The previous president in the United States says that Mexicans are rapists and drug dealers, and some of them are nice. So it is easy to detect a Spanish person as soon as they open their mouth. But I don't understand why there is hatred against Jews. I just don't get it. Just because there is a different religion, I'm confused.
So it's not a dumb question. It's a very difficult question. And the history of anti-Semitism goes all the way back to religious competition between the early Jews and early Christians, which end up, some of it entering into Christian sacred scriptures. It extends through history as a useful hatred, shall we say, for rulers. You have problems, Jews become a scapegoat, in part because they're such a small minority. So you can concentrate the anger or deflect the anger that might have gone to the prince or the king onto Jews, right? And so as a result, you get expulsions, right? I mean, Jews are expelled from England and from France and from Spain and, various countries around the world. And in the modern period, and I'm jumping now, anti-Semitism takes on very explicitly political dimensions, not just religious, but explicitly political ones. And the word itself is coined, anti-Semitism. It dates from the 19th century, 1873. And you get anti-Semitic political parties. And again, it's a means of mobilizing people with hatred to get them to support you. And, it has nothing to do much with who Jews are, what they do, what they look like. And it has everything to do with what the people who decide they're going to hate them and persecute them and discriminate them feel and think. And even today, I mean, we just had this incident in Texas, right, with a guy coming in and holding hostage a rabbi and 3 congregants, because he believed that Jews control the world, that they're very important and influential. Now, where does that belief come from? Well, it's been around for at least a century. It makes no sense. It's not true, but it's been around and people continue to believe it. And in part, maybe because they've never met a Jew, right? Since there are so few of them. And in part, because it's useful. It provides an explanation for things that are going wrong in the world.
Okay. You are a historian and you talk about Jewish culture as well. One thing that I was surprised to read at one time when I was reading another history book is that the United States, they were not welcoming to Jewish refugees during the period of World War II. And I was surprised because almost, World War II was Hitler expanding his forces all throughout the Europe, but also was for the extermination of the Jewish people. And the United States, seeing this happening, they still didn't open the door to Jewish refugees. I wonder if you could help me understand why not. I mean, I don't think you will know the answer, but maybe you have a better theory than I could create in my mind.
So prejudice against Jews and discrimination against Jews, and especially against immigrants, gets codified in 1924 in immigration restriction legislation. It's not just against Jews, it's also against Italians and it's, other peoples from Eastern Europe, etc. And then you have the Great Depression, when so many people are thrown out of work. And the idea of letting more immigrants into the country it seems foolish and dangerous. And even as the numbers of Jewish refugees increase, the United States holds on to what have often been called paper walls, making all kinds of, you have to have this visa and that, all these things that will indicate that you will not become a public charge. Right? You will not end up needing welfare or help from the government. And this is in place even as World War II starts. So the US is aware that Hitler has, in essence, has two wars going, one to conquer Europe, right? And the other to exterminate the Jews. And there are some people who have, temporary positions of power. For example, in southern France, who use that power to give visas to help rescue refugees, most especially Jewish figures who were accomplished in different ways, writers, political activists, artists, etc. And that helped, but that was not, as it were, the official government position. And there was a lot of what should we say? It was called isolationist sentiment in the United States prior to Pearl Harbor, which said, we don't want to get involved in the war. And in Europe, it was Europe's war, right? And that sentiment made it very difficult to say we should get involved to help rescue Jews. Because the government had difficulty even saying we should get involved to help the British, right? And because there was a point in time when just the British, right, in 1940 were left fighting Hitler, right, before Germany invades the Soviet Union after it's conquered France and stuff, right? It's just Great Britain fighting. So it's complicated, but you're absolutely right. It's a real failure on the part of the American government not to have recognized how crucial making the steps to rescue refugees would be in historic terms. And there's a famous example from a ship called the USS St. Louis. It's a ship that sails out of Hamburg, and all of the people on it, around 900, have visas to come to the US, but not visas to come until 1940 or 41 or 42, right? Okay. And they're going to go to Cuba first, right? And stay in Cuba until they're eligible, their visa. And Cuba turns them down. And the ship sails slowly up the Florida coast, hoping, to get a change, to accept these people. And because the captain was sympathetic to the Jews. And nothing happens. I mean, you can't get Roosevelt to change the policy. You can't get Congress to act. And eventually he sails back to Europe. And the ones who landed in Britain are the fortunate ones, because Britain says, okay, we'll take a certain number. And, France says, we'll take a certain number. The Netherlands said, etc. Yeah.
Wow. So I mentioned a minute ago that about 40% of Jews are in the States and 20% are somewhere else. Is there any fear of assimilation in a way that the Jewish religion or faith or culture will be going away?
There are always people who are worried that Jewish religion and culture will disappear. I think, you can find statements like that, throughout. I mean, if you go to the posnlibrary.com, you'll find accounts of people saying, my goodness, we're gonna disappear. This is what we need to do. And then they present a program, right, of what needs to be done. And similarly, if you're interested in how Jews respond to anti-Semitism, the Posn Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization has a variety of responses. What should we as Jews do, right, in the face of anti-Semitism? Because there's no unanimity. I mean, Zionism is one way to answer that was put forth, and we've got some, great pieces of political writing in the volumes. But socialism was another one. Said get rid of class inequality, and you're going to get rid of anti-Semitism. So there are a lot of different Jewish ways of struggling with this ongoing hatred.
Okay, I have one more question, and this is my personal curiosity from many years. About 20% of the Nobel Prize winners are Jews. Considering the Jewish population to be so small, it's less than 1%. I wonder if you have a theory for that.
Oh, I don't have a theory, but it is pretty amazing, I think, that so many Jewish men and women won the Nobel Prize. And we have wonderful examples of the writings of these Nobel Prize winners, Imre Kertész, even Bob Dylan, right, who most recently won it, Nellie Sachs, Isaac Bashevis Singer, I mean, all of these incredible writers, you can read some excerpts of their writing in the Posn Library and get a sense of the power of their writing. But I don't have a theory as to why Jews have been such good and smart and interesting and compelling writers.
I mean, this is one of my theories. Could it be that literacy is such an important part of, I mean, when a kid is born, his father or rabbi is already pushing the Torah and reading together and whatever. So I don't know, this is me speculating, literacy being such a fundamental part of the culture.
I think that's very important. Yes, literacy. Jewish education for girls as well as boys stressed the importance of literacy, and it may be that as well that a minority situation and being self-conscious in that way, as well as having a very rich culture to draw upon, also encouraged Jewish writers to create and to contribute their own thoughts. But the Jewish culture invites what I like to think of as a conversation. So it's not just that you're reading what's done in the past, but you read debates, right, and arguments. And you're invited as a Jewish reader to contribute to that conversation through commentary, through writing your own interpretation, to engage. And I think that also stimulates creativity.
Well, Professor Deborah Dash Moore, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I'm so grateful for this conversation. I wonder if you could tell us one more time, I don't know, where can people go and visit the Posn Library, and where can they find out more about you and the work that you are doing?
Okay, so the Posn Library of Jewish Culture and Civilization, if people go to posnlibrary.com, P-O-S-E-N, library, one word, .com, they'll enter it and they have to register. It's for free. Everything is available once you register. So that's a great place to go and to explore, where you can type in a word and see what pops up, right? You get a variety of things, whether it's Holocaust or Exodus or, really interesting. And as for me, I do have a website. You have to go to the University of Michigan website, and it's under sites, sites.lsa.edu. umich.edu with a / and then you put in Deborah Dash Moore as one word, and you come up with my own site. And
I will put that in the show notes so that the listeners can
okay.
just go into click one button and they will
Right.
be directly tied to
That's,
your
yeah,
website.
that'd be much easier than describing it.
Professor Moore, thank you so much for your time. You answered some of the questions I've been asking myself for many years.
Well, I'm really glad, Elaine, that was it helpful. So that's great.